Hi friends, today I take a new topic, the functional arrangement of cerebrum. On previous lectures we studied the morphological arrangement of cerebrum. Here we take a new one. Here is my sixth part of brain and cranial nerves. Okay, the main objectives today we study are primary sensory centers, then the association sensory areas, then just learn about efferent or motor areas, and then learn about speech centers, posterior speech area, then the association of sensory and motor areas, then the functional asymmetry of hemispheres, because the right hemisphere is functionally for left side of our body, and the left cerebral hemisphere controls our right side of body. And here we can see two areas, motor areas and sensory areas. The central sulcus is divided both these areas, and here we can see the frontal lobe, parietal lobe and occipital lobe. Here parietal lobe, occipital lobe, and here be the temporal lobe. First we learn about the primary sensory centers. The primary sensory centers accept the fibers that arises from the thalamic nuclei, including lateral and medial geniculate bodies. Lateral geniculate bodies controls the visual, and medial geniculate body for auditory function. These centers feature well distinguishable projection areas related to respective sensory pathways. Then first we study about the somatosensory cortex. It is occupies in the postcentral gyrus. We can look here, and also we can look here primary somatosensory area here, and where the thalamocortical fibers terminate, and the gyrus contains the centers of skin sensitivity and proprioceptive sensitivity. The upper portion of gyrus is responsible for, we can look here with the upper portion, and for the lower limbs, trunk, and here we can see middle portion, the upper limb and lower portion. Then we can see the head, and for lower inferior portion for neck. The middle portion contains the limbs, and the inferior portion contains neck and head. Then the body thus mirrored in upside down fashion. Here we can see the largest areas are related to the head and the hands. As far as the afferent fibers decussate on various levels, the right hemisphere deals with the left half of the body and vice versa. Next we can study the visual cortex area. Here is the visual cortex. Visual cortex, it occupies the marginal areas of calcareous sulcus. About here, calcareous sulcus we can see here, like here, and it accepts the fibers that arises from the visual relay nuclei located in the lateral geniculate body and pulvinar of thalamus. Left half of each visual area is represented in the right hemisphere and vice versa. Next we studied about the auditory cortex. Here we can see the auditory cortex. It occupies the transverse temporal gyri or Hesh's gyri that reside on the internal surface of the superior temporal gyrus that faces the insula. Insula is the inner lobe. The fibers that arises from the auditory relay nuclei situated within the medial geniculate bodies and the inferior colliculi of the tectal plate eventually terminate within this area. Tactile plate has another name, also known as corpora quadrigemina. Okay, each area except the both the contralateral and ipsilateral fibers. Then we can study about the olfactory and gustatory. Here we can see the olfactory cortex, and here be the gustatory cortex. Okay, it occupies the ungus of parahippocampal gyrus. It accepts the fibers from ipsilateral olfactory bulb and subcortical centers. The olfactory system is a single unit with the fibers that bypass the thalamic nuclei on the way to destination point. The olfactory cortex is also responsible for analysis of gustatory impulse. That means taste. Olfactory for smell. Okay. Then we can study association sensory areas. Association sensory areas resides between the primary sensory areas and related to occipital, parietal and temporal lobes. Just look into this picture. Here we can see somatosensory association areas, and here we can see visual association area, and this blue is auditory association area for hearing. Okay, these perform advanced data processing and occupy in large areas, and it is not true cortical ends of analyzers. They perform primary data processing and subunit the results to the association areas. The association areas feature wide communication with the hypothalamus, hippocampus, the amygdaloid bodies, and thalamus, so the data processed acquire emotional tints. The association areas are solely responsible for creation of images and formation of complex, full shaped feelings. The association areas transmit the impulse to the efferent cortex of the frontal lobe, which is responsible for the actions. Okay, then we can study here. Then next we study about the motor areas. The motor centers occupies the precentral gyrus and paracentral lobule. Here we can see precentral gyrus and paracentral lobule located about here. And here be the premotor cortex and prefrontal cortex. The upper portion of the gyrus and the lobule are responsible for the muscles of the lower limbs and trunks. Here we look. Okay. The middle portions for the muscles of the upper limb and the lower portions for the muscles of the head and neck. Here. The skeletal muscles thus are represented in the same fashion as the sensory areas. The largest areas of the motor cortex deal with the muscle of hand and mimic muscles and the muscle of tongue. The gigantic pyramidal cells situated in the fifth layer of the postcentral gyrus give rise to the pyramidal tracts, the corticospinal and corticonuclear tracts. As far as the fibers decussate at certain levels, the right motor areas control the left half of the body and vice versa, as we already said. Motor cortex control the accuracy of voluntary movements. The association areas occupy the most part of frontal lobe anterior to precentral. They communicate with the thalamic nuclei, the nuclei of corpus striatum, and with the cerebellum. Apart from this, the frontal lobe accepts the impulse from the association areas of the occipital, parietal, and temporal lobes. The intermediate zone features the centers responsible for the movements of eyes and head, and the inferior portions of the frontal lobe features the speech motor centers. The association areas of the frontal lobe control the individual's behavior. We can see here. Then prefrontal cortex for working memory for spatial tasks here, and executive here for executive area of task management, here for the working memory of object recall task, and this portion about frontal pole. In the region of frontal pole, we can see solving complex multitask problems. Okay, then the impulses from the frontal lobe proceed to the precentral gyrus, here to here, and which in turn give rise to motor pathways to the executive centers. Next, we can study the speech centers. Before going to speech centers, we need to just analyze what we study. The functional organization of cerebral cortex for sensory areas. The primary somatosensory area is located in postcentral gyrus, and primary visual area is located in the occipital lobe. Primary auditory area is located in the temporal lobe. The primary gustatory area is located in the base of the postcentral gyrus, and primary olfactory area in the temporal lobe. And speech function controls. Dominant hemisphere has four speech centers, 3 sensory and 1 motor. The sensory speech area are area 22, 39 and 40. Area 22 here. Here is the Wernicke's area, higher auditory association area or Wernicke's area. And here be the higher visual association area. And here is the higher association area for somesthetic senses. The motor speech center is area 44 and 45, that is Broca's area. Here be the Broca's area. The speech centers, motor and sensory, may be transferred to the right hemisphere in child up to 6 to 8 years in case of cerebral injury. The speech function appears to be relatively new in evolution course, so the speech function are not well localized. Speech centers development is anatomically predisposed yet at the early ages of embryo's existence, but adequate functioning requires quite a long training. That is why the speech centers become apparent after birth and occupy only one hemisphere as a rule. The entire speech system features the sensory and motor centers. Sensory centers reside in the posterior speech area. They deal with the perception of auditory signals. We said about here posterior speech area, speech cortex, including Wernicke's area, and they deal with the perception of auditory signals. Okay, the motor centers generate speech response in form of words pronunciation and the character spelling. These centers occupy the posterior speech area of frontal lobe. Here we can see that we laterally said the areas of 22, 39, 40 receives the input from the hearing, vision, touch and proprioception, and information is processed in the area 22, that means in the posterior part, then projected to the Broca's area through arcuate fasciculus. Arcuate fasciculus for fibers to next neighboring gyri. Here from the area 22 here, and information is processed, then it is projected to Broca's area through arcuate fasciculus. The lesions of speech center. Lesion involving speech center is dominant in hemisphere is known as aphasia. It is two types, the sensory aphasia and motor aphasia. Contact aphasia is the lesion of arcuate fasciculus, fluent or compression intact, or repetition of spoken language is extremely difficult. The posterior speech area is associated with the primary auditory and visual cortex. The impulse generated from the auditory perception first reach the primary auditory cortex, then and eventually reach the posterior portion of the superior temporal gyrus. We can see about here. Then and supramarginal gyrus here we located supramarginal gyrus. Then the auditory speech center, the data processing in the area is required for compression. The impulses from the visual perception reach the primary visual cortex. The impulse from the visual perception reach the primary visual cortex and terminate within the angular gyrus here. Which features the visual speech center. The center deals with the characters recognition. The visual and auditory speech centers maintain tight association because compression of words written requires conversion of the images into the sound shell, which is under the responsibility of Wernicke's area. Anterior speech area resides into the frontal lobe. Anterior speech resides in the frontal lobe here, namely within the triangular part of the inferior frontal gyrus. This area contains the motor speech center. This center programs the speech articulation and sends the impulses to the inferior portion of the precentral gyrus that features motor centers for laryngeal muscles, the muscles of tongue, and mimic muscles. The premotor area of middle frontal gyrus, which occupies its posterior portion, contains the writing motor center. This area is known as Broca's area, collectively known as the Broca's area. The center programs precise movements of upper limbs required for word spelling. The data encoded is transmitted to middle portion of the precentral gyrus. Here, it is transferred to middle portion of the precentral gyrus, which controls the muscles of upper limb. Then the association of sensory and motor areas. The speech areas maintain communication via uncinate fasciculus and always act together. According to modern concept, the phrase structure is genre in the posterior speech area here, in the Wernicke's area, proceed to the Broca's area through uncinate fasciculus to trigger the speech articulation program. Injury to the Broca's area results depending on injury severity, either in complete inability to produce articulate speech or in partial disorder seen as slow laboured speech with pronounced articulation impairments and grammar errors. The condition yet features preserved compression. Injury to Wernicke's area here. Injury to Wernicke's area results in severe speech disorders manifested as both language compression and language production inability. Injury to uncinate fasciculus results in accelerated and well-articulated yet rather meaningless speech. This occurs because the motor area receives no impulses from the Wernicke's area. Comprehension is not impaired, as well as because the Wernicke's area remains intact. Next we go to just here be the Broca's area. Here is the Wernicke's area. Here be the angular gyrus. Then here be the last portion, the hemispheric lateralization. As far as the speech centers resides only in the left hemisphere in 95% of occurrence, it is called the speech or the dominant hemisphere. The functional difference between two cerebral hemispheres are: for left hemispheric functions receive somatosensory signals from the and control muscles on right side of the body, reasoning and numerical and scientific skill, ability to use and understand sign language, spoken and written language. Basically, it is for logical. Left hemisphere for logical and right hemisphere for imagination. Basically, we can say right hemisphere for imagination and left hemisphere for logic. The right hemisphere functions are receives the somatic sensory signals from the from and controls muscles on left side of body, musical and artistic awareness, space and pattern perception, recognition of faces and emotional content of facial expressions, generating emotional content of language, generating mental images to compare spatial relationship, identify and discriminating among odors. Odors means smell. Okay, friends, I think this video is helpful to you because it contains so many some difficulty in this topic are here. But when we revise this topic, you can surely surely study this topic and easily understand. If you have any suggestion, make a comment, and if you like this video, please like on the button. Yeah, please subscribe my channel, and for updated videos, press on the bell icon button. Thank you, friends. Bye.